It's a podcast where we go inside addiction to raise our audience's level of consciousness. Now, welcome to the podcast, and I just wondered if you could start us off by just telling us a bit about what your sort of definition of addiction is.
Thanks for having me. My definition has really evolved over the years. Initially it was AA's definition of a spiritual malady, and I don't believe that to be true for me anymore. I see that addiction as a coping mechanism, and a maladaptive one at that. So I used it to cope with a number of things that I was struggling with as I was growing up: depression, anxiety, struggling to fit in. We moved a lot in the UK, and I now understand, having had quite a bit of therapy, that actually what preceded my addiction was complex trauma. So I used alcohol and drugs to cope. And I see it in a very different light today. I don't see it as something that, while I feel sad about that amount of time that I see as wasted, even though it wasn't, I still see it as a coping mechanism.
Yeah. And just to rewind a bit, like you said, it's kind of evolved addiction, your opinion of yourself and therapy and addiction, all that fun stuff. But if we go back to the beginning, where would you kind of define the beginning, and what was that like for you?
The beginning of recovery?
The beginning of your kind of life, and when things started to kind of happen, when you were sort of growing up, and how you kind of, became addicted.
Yeah. Well, I was born in the US, and then left at the age of 3 to move to England. It's kind of funny because now I live back in the US, but it's like I've gone full circle. And that move, I was 3-4 years old, and that was really traumatic. And I didn't understand that at the time. So I don't have very much memory of my childhood at all. I really started to remember around my teenage years, which is when I started drinking, around 12 or 13 years old, and smoking weed, and then it very quickly progressed to speed, and alcohol was the constant throughout. I don't believe in the term functioning person with addiction, because I think that there is no, you might pretend to be functioning, but you're still using in the background to cope with life. So that's not an idea of functionality to me. But as far as that definition goes, I guess you could say that I was able to get a degree, go to college, and go through the the kind of functions of life. So I graduated, I moved to Manchester, and my drinking just got worse, as I moved out of home and had more freedom. Didn't really have a coping strategy for social life or for life as a whole. I had very stressful jobs. So my addiction just progressed, and progressed, and I did a lot of things that I think I wouldn't do. And at 32, I reached the stage where I just couldn't take it anymore. I had one epic binge. I drank 14 bottles of wine in one weekend. And I just reached a rock bottom, and I reached out for some help, and then found recovery in AA for the first 5 years. And I still identify with elements of AA. I believe that, I had reached a point where I was drinking that I'd become powerless over alcohol, but I don't believe I'm powerless anymore. And the spiritual malady I don't really align with. But at the time, I needed that structure. I needed any structure to help me with recovery.
Yeah. And like you say, that structure was important at that time. And when you kind of hit that rock bottom and have had that binge on the 14 bottles of wine, what was that like for you, and what kind of shifted, and how did you get into recovery?
It was awful. I mean, I'd lost my job. My family had kind of cut me off. I'd lost a lot of friends, because at that point in my using, I was completely isolated, because I was just like a fall down every time I drank, so it was safer for me to be at home. It was awful, I had no memory of what happened the night before. I'd wake up and I'd check if I was covered in bruises, if I'd hurt myself. I'd check through my phone to see what I'd done the night before. So it was just this immense amount of shame and just feeling completely out of control. And I really struggle. It's funny you asked this question because I wrote about it this week, and I've spent the last 8.5 years in recovery trying to figure out what happened at that moment that I decided to get help. And I guess the only thing that I can put my finger on is that I fully accepted that I could no longer be in denial about the quantity and the excess of my using and how it just wasn't helping my life. And I was really faced with two decisions, in my life, which would happen very soon if I continued to drink in the way that I was, or get some help. And I tried to do it alone so many times and it just didn't work. So I knew I had to do something different. And a family member had been to AA and had shown me that that was an option. And in Manchester, there are such limited options for recovery. It's very 12-step dominated. So that's what I did.
Yeah. And when you say you tried some things on your own before you got to that point, what were some of the things that you tried?
I tried to use exercise, and healthy eating as a means of moderating use. I tried not drinking at all. I tried budgeting my money so that I didn't have any money to spend on alcohol. That didn't work because I just sold my stuff. I manipulated people for money, for alcohol. I did all the things, to try and stop, all the detoxes, all the diets, and I couldn't do it alone.
Yeah. And you got to that point where you went to, like you say, that kind of AA, and you got to that point. How was that for you getting there? And what did that look like?
Going to AA felt awful. On one hand, it felt like, I think AA has this reputation of being, old men who have a really bad problem with alcohol, which is true to some extent, but that's not what the fellowship looks like. It is male dominated, but it includes young people, and there were people my age, and I was surprised by that. So while my first sponsor said that I just kind of slumped down in the shower and announced my name and that I was new, and she said I just looked so totally defeated, and that's how I felt. But by the end of that meeting, I had a sense of hope. There were people who told my story, or stories similar to mine, especially around the not being able to stop and trying everything to stop. And yet, it was only once they found a solution that they proposed that they found recovery. So, there were elements of it that I didn't identify with, the use of the word God and it being a spiritual program. But at that point, I was willing to just swallow my doubts and just try it because I was so desperate. So I left that meeting having such a sense of hope. And actually, I haven't had a drink since that meeting.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is really amazing when you think about it, because I tried so many things for so many years. And then I started drinking at 12, 13, up to the age of 32. That's a long time. And then to just suddenly stop was amazing to me.
Yeah. And how did you feel about the fear of who you'd be without drink?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure if I feared who I would be. I feared how I would cope. Because, at that point, I saw alcohol as a coping strategy. And, it kind of, and I didn't understand this actually until I moved to America, but my nervous system was so dysregulated because of my complex trauma that I no longer had that. So, there was you could say I was white knuckling it for a lot of years in AA. You know, I just felt so awful. You know, whilst there was the reprieve of not waking up hungover every day, which was great, and having a little bit more energy to engage in life and having a life, right? Because before it was in existence, it was tough. Yeah. So it wasn't fear of who I'd become, but fear of how I'd cope. And I did struggle. But I didn't struggle enough to go back to drinking. So I guess I coped.
Yeah.
And that's how I view people with substance use disorder as actually, you know, they're highly stigmatized, but I really think that we don't realize the power that we have because we coped and survived for so long. You know, that's actually a strength. It might be a maladaptive coping strategy, but it worked to keep us safe enough to find recovery.
Yeah. And when you were kind of in recovery, what did that journey look like going through recovery? Did you use any particular tools or anything in mind?
Yeah, recovery has really changed over the last, mostly over the last 3.5 years, but the first 5 was 12 steps, you know, and I did those in AA and NA, and then I started to approach mindfulness, and then I started working with a health coach to integrate more healthy living because I really struggled with food in recovery. And understanding what I do now, I understand that the brain chemistry is completely out of whack for people who find recovery, and it takes a long time for that to regulate. And if you add complex trauma into that, you know, you're just going to feel all over the place. It's going to feel like you're eating sugar, you know, all the time, then shooting coffee. You know, it's just, it was really tough. So mindful meditation really helped. Healthy eating helped regulate, you know, my blood sugar more effectively. And then when I moved to America, I started going to refuge recovery, and then I started therapy, and therapy has been my go-to for recovery over the last 3.5 years, and in fact, that has been far superior to anything I've ever done. And what that looks like today is actually somatic experiencing, because I believe recovery can't live up here, you know. I think it needs to be a holistic approach, certainly for me, because, you know, you've got to be able to regulate and cope with what's going on in your body. And I think people with substance use disorder are so used to disassociating from their body and from their environment that recovery has to be a process of reintegration.
Yeah. And you mentioned somatic experiencing, which I want to touch on a bit later, but just in terms of people that have never been to therapy or don't know what therapy is, how would you kind of describe therapy to them?
I would describe therapy as a one-to-one interaction, although there can be group therapy too, but for me it was one-to-one therapy with a trained, licensed therapist who had experience in trauma. I had therapy in the UK, in Manchester, and it was more CBT therapy, and that didn't work for me because I needed to be able to access what happened to me in order to be able to renegotiate that situation and move on. So what that looked like in practice was talking about my experiences, establishing, you know, there's a process in therapy where you have to first establish a sense of safety with a therapist. So the therapist needs to know that you have coping strategies, and they will help you to develop those so that when you do start to talk about trauma, that you were able to cope. So that was my experience of therapy. And also, you know, I find it so useful to just have that dedicated hour every week to just sit down and say, this is what's happening for me. And even if the person doesn't respond, although I don't like it when that happens, I feel like I hated it at first. I'm like, how does that make you feel? They're like, can you just tell me what's happening? Because it was really helpful for me to have that feedback, you know, especially when you come from a 12-step program where, and I really want to emphasize, I am not anti-12-step. I believe it is a valid pathway to recovery. It just worked out that it wasn't for me in the end. But when you come from a program that emphasizes defects and what's wrong with you, it's really helpful to see that actually these aren't weaknesses. These are things that you use to cope, and we can strengthen those and, to lead some more self-directed and, to help you develop autonomy and agency. I don't believe that I'm powerless over drugs. I don't believe that if I go to the supermarket that alcohol's going to jump off the shelf and into my shopping basket. I don't believe that. Therapy has been amazing.
Yeah. And like you say, therapy and counselling can be awesome tools to use in order to help out with recovery. And you did mention the word somatic experiencing. I just wondered if you could tell us a bit about that and how you find it.
I find that I've had more breakthroughs in somatic experiencing in the first session than I did in the last 2 years of therapy. Because for me, and this is well known now, that trauma is stored in the body. So, if you're struggling in recovery or struggling to find recovery, it could be that you are not really integrated into your body, and you're not. And when I first started doing it, I felt so uncomfortable. So what it looked like was just kind of experiencing like bodily sensations, like how do I feel? How am I breathing? Where do I feel the sensation? And what does it feel and sound and look like? And it blew my mind. I think it's amazing. So I work with a somatic experiencing coach now. Was weekly, it's now every other week, to just experience what's happening in my body. And I meet them on a Friday, so I have a tendency in my job, especially as a writer, and now that I'm at grad school and doing all the stuff that I do, to just live up here a lot of the time. And, I get to the end of the week, I'm exhausted. And I need to just sit and wait for my body to recalibrate. And it's the most simple but powerful thing. It's amazing.
Yeah. And almost like you're saying, kind of person-centered, when a therapist doesn't really say anything back to you and you just want the answers. Sometimes that silence has the power. It does. Although it's super annoying, and as the client, you're like, just tell me.
I just tell me what's happening. And actually, I had a therapist in Portland that was so helpful to give me a lot of answers, and I'm a really solution-oriented person, so I really like to know the intellectual side of things. So she gave me loads of books to read, which was just amazing to me. And then, as part of my process, I'm really lucky that I started writing, because that enables me to process. That is one of my main tools. So I'll pitch, I've just noticed that this is happening in me, and if it's accepted, I can then write about it, and as I write, it's a way of integrating that and processing it. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. And when you look back over your journey and recovery, is there any parts that really stand out to you?
Oh, that's a tough question. I guess the beginning of removing alcohol. I wasn't really taking that many drugs at that time, so really removing alcohol and any strategy to cope was I was suddenly dropped into this new world. Everything was really bright and loud, and it was too much. And then it just felt like I had a completely different life and I was a new person. And today I feel like I am a completely different person to who I was then. Liv back then was just numb, didn't know who she was, how to cope, where she fit in the world. It just felt completely lost and had no kind of anchor. So I guess that was a major point, and another major shift was around the 2-3 year mark when I realised that I just was feeling like crap in recovery, and that this isn't what I wanted my recovery to look like. So I made a change there, and I started my blog, and I started writing about recovery, and that's really when recovery took off for me, and there was a new dimension to it, and that was like, oh, this feels like this is something that I can sustain and that I want, because really, sitting in church basements and talking about what was wrong with me was only marginally better than drinking. It wasn't really, I was like, I could do this the rest of my life, seriously? It's like I hit this major depression. I was like, no, I don't want to hear about your washing machine or your defective relationship or, like, seriously. So yeah, that was a major point. And then had I not done that, I wouldn't have, it's so funny we're talking about this, because I wrote this blog yesterday, and I wrote it for a woman who had contacted me when I started my blog in 2014, and she said, I love your writing. So this is a woman in Michigan in America, contacted me in Manchester, read my work, said, would you write for us and we'll pay you? And that blew my mind. And then 8.5 years later, she contacted me and said, would you mind writing about the evolution of your recovery? And so I've been processing that this week, and I guess it was a pivotal moment was her believing in me, her believing in my capacity and my abilities and capabilities, and that really spurred me on to just think, well, why don't I just move to America? And that, I guess that was the last kind of pivotal moment in my recovery. It was the craziest, well, I probably should have used that word today, it was the most mind-blowing thing I've ever done.
Yeah. But
I didn't have anywhere to live, I didn't know anyone here, didn't have a job even though I had the prospect of writing. And then here I am nearly 4 years later, I bought a house, I have a dog, and I just started grad school, and I've been writing that whole time.
Yeah. No, it sounds amazing. And one thing I really get from your story and that I'm hearing is this idea of, like you say, being more than just going to meetings and being in the same thing with the same labels. My name's Luke and I'm an addict and I'll be in this meeting for the rest of my life. I've got no meaning. And like you say, I love the way you put it. It's marginally better than just being drinking and using drugs. It's just marginally better. I don't want to be here listening to your washing machine. I want more. I need that meaning in my life. And that's the thing that we miss, is that meaning, that focus, those kind of reasons bigger than ourselves, that sense of purpose to really live. And, to just understand that just because we came from that place doesn't mean we can evolve much further past it. And I think that's really important. And I do think we get stuck with a lot of these labels like addict. And I just wondered your opinion and thoughts on labels and how that kind of impacts us.
I think that these labels are seen as empowering within peer recovery groups, but the reality is outside of groups, they're disempowering and stigmatizing. And I only really learned that when I moved to the US and I left 12 steps. And I became friends with the three recovery scientists who had studied the impact of these words. And they were able to show that it marginalizes us, it negatively affects people's view of us, and it affects the quality and even the access to treatment that we deserve. So using those words just perpetuates this belief and ideology that addiction is a moral failing, whereas if we medicalize it, because it is a medical condition, and we say substance use disorder and use person-centered language, then we're more likely to get fairer treatment and be considered a person rather than what we've been doing. I think that's the biggest problem with saying I'm an addict, because all it does is focus on one aspect of behaviour when you were really suffering. Whereas we see substance use disorder, we see it like any other chronic condition that needs treatment and responds to treatment. I think that's a really crucial point. So I don't identify with those labels anymore. In fact, I do talk about being in recovery, and in my writing, I'm very open about it. My writing is based on my blogs out there. But, it's not something it's not an identity. It's really interesting because Carly Benson said that this week, on social media, that, sobriety is not your identity. And I think it is for a lot of people. And it was mine for a very long time. But I don't define myself by that anymore. I see that I'm Liv, and that is one aspect of who I am. That's the foundation on which I live my life and I prosper in all areas of my life. That's how I consider it. And I still struggle with openly saying it in some places because I do see that you treat it differently. Although I just started grad school last week, so I really want to change that reading list and update it because it's a little outdated. I'm waiting for the right opportunity to do that because it is going to out me, And I would really like the opportunity to see how people talk about substance use disorder when they don't know that someone in that group has it.
Yeah. No, it's interesting to run those kind of social experiments. And like you say, to see yourself as more than just that, like when you just go to meetings every day and you're just like, oh, I'm in recovery, and that's just who you are, and it becomes your identity. I'm an addict and I'm just in recovery and that's it. And it's just recognising you're so much more than that, and you're just amazing. All of us are, and we're just more than an addict. We're more than someone in recovery. And that it's okay not to always feel the need to kind of be sort of identified by that or get your significance by that.
Yeah, and I think the problem occurs because there is this miscommunication around the word humility, because I think humility in the rooms is seen as keeping you small, and being humble, when in fact, actually my very first sponsor said to me, humility is everything in its right size. So there is if you're using that definition, there is nothing wrong with thinking, I need more purpose and passion in my life, and I'm going to go out and get that. Whereas the miscommunication aspect of 12-step will be like, no, you need to stay in your shitty job, in the church basement, focusing on your defects so that you don't let your ego take over and think that you're more than recovery, when in fact I would argue that you are. It keeps you small and it keeps you thinking that you're not capable, and I don't think that's helpful.
Yeah, and like you say, it makes you think you're not capable, and that's not helpful.
No.
It can be, part of your identity, but it doesn't have to be all of your identity.
No, exactly.
Yeah, and just in terms of your blog and everything else you've been doing in recovery, how has that been going? I wonder if you could tell us a bit about that.
Well, and hard. Moving to the States at the same time as starting a business was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was harder than getting sober. It was massively dysregulating. Because it was, I thought, well, I'm a dual citizen, I'd been to the States in the summer. I know how America works. I had no idea how America works. I used to find myself in the supermarket going, where are the eggs? They put the eggs in the fridge over here, right? And all the vegetables are called different names. And why is spice so expensive? And that was literally my experience in every aspect of my life. Imagine trying to navigate health insurance when you come from England and you can just go to a GP or you can go to the hospital. Here, I'd been here for 2 months. I fell off my bike and broke my arm. And I got off my bike and cycled home because I didn't know what to do. So imagine trying to understand all of these systems and processes and then starting a business as well. It was just it was the best, but it was also the hardest thing I've done. Being able to sit in a coffee shop and write, and be like, yeah, I'm a writer, this is awesome. I get to write about my experiences and drink coffee. This is awesome. But then other times it was really hard because, I didn't have the connection that you have in a work situation. As much as I hated working for-profit organisations, there was a connection that you had with people on a daily basis. There was structure, there was processes and systems, and so I had to develop all that for myself, and that was really challenging. But after the third year, it definitely felt like I'm more stabilised now. I diversified my business slightly, so as well as doing writing for organisations, like for publications, I was writing for organisations and I was helping write people's websites. And, moving into copywriting became more sustainable, so that when I did write blogs and more journalistic articles, then it became more of a passion again. So it was really helpful. So in that time, I probably published about 700 articles, which was a one-way track to burnout. It was really hard. Because, the nature of self-employed work is that you don't know when the next check or job is coming in, especially if you're working on a per blog basis. So yeah, it was really hard. And then I realised that I started this group last year called Life After 12-Step Recovery, and it's for people that are transitioning out. And there's now 600 people in there. And I realised over the course of that time that, I could really help more people if I had the clinical skills to do that. And I could maybe even develop a program for it. And I saw so many people that were so disempowered that I was like, I need to do more. Like, writing about things does have some change, does affect some change, but there's a capability to do so much more. So as my writing has taken on more of a social justice angle, and considering that, especially in America, your skin colour really dictates whether or not you find recovery, and that's not right. Everybody deserves an opportunity for recovery. So it felt like a master's in social work would really help me to be able to affect more change on a macro and a micro level. And I applied to Portland State, and there was a 1 in 3 success rate, and I can't believe I got in.
Yeah, no,
everyone
awesome.
says
Congratulations.
that I'm the only one that's surprised. Thank you. It's challenging, and I, technically we started last week, but we don't have classes until next week, and the textbooks that I'm reading, I'm like, whoa, this is going to be a challenge, but great, Yeah,
and it just ties into that what we've been talking about becoming more and growing, and just adding more like versions of yourself and keep growing.
Yeah, I feel like recovery has given me the confidence in my ability, to be able to say, actually, yeah, I can do that. Whereas if you'd asked me in the first year of my recovery, can I see myself moving to America and becoming a social worker and having a private practice and changing the world, I'd say, who are you talking about? And now I'm like, yes, yeah, I can.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. And I think having that open-minded and possibility when you're early in recovery is really good. But like you mentioned about writing kind of 700 blog posts and being self-employed and working, towards burnout, how do you manage that balance between the more part of you versus having boundaries and self-care and loving yourself?
I think that for me, and I think this is true for a lot of people with substance use disorder, is that they have to experience before they can implement boundaries and structure. So, I didn't see it was a problem until I burned out, and then I realised, hang on a minute, this isn't sustainable. I need to make sure that I have, what are the main stresses here? What is motivating me to work so hard? And what was motivating me was the fear of money, no money. and so I developed a system whereby, I could sell block packages, which would give me the financial security to know, well, I've got my mortgage and my insurance covered for next month. Imagine that, having to figure out, oh, I have to pay for insurance? It's insane here. My insurance is actually probably a third of my mortgage payment. It's just, it still hurts my head. And that's not everything. So, I had to implement some structure. I had to learn how to work to a schedule, to use the active part of my brain at the best time to do the more challenging tasks and to do the more menial tasks when I'm more tired, and not work weekends, and learn to say no to customers. Like, if you're going to email me at 9 o'clock at night, I'm not responding. And I developed with a lawyer some contracts that actually stipulated, this is when you can contact me, this is when I'm going to respond, all my boundaries. And it worked. A friend of mine, Veronica Valley, you might know her. She's a really well-known podcaster and recovery coach. She's a therapist in the UK, but she lives over here now. And she says, we tell people how to treat us. And she's absolutely right. If I answer those emails at 9 o'clock at night, my client's going to think I'm available 24 hours a day. And that's not okay. And, it's been really helpful for my peace of mind to know that. And what's interesting too is all this fear and worry was unnecessary. Because even when I thought I wasn't going to make it, a job came in. And that has shown me over the last nearly 4 years that when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're living in your purpose in life, you will be provided for. And I would not call myself a religious person, but I do believe that the universe provides for people. And that's what's happened for me.
Yeah. No, awesome. It sounds like such an amazing journey. And like you say, managing that balance between faith and trust in yourself versus setting boundaries to let the world know, what interactions they can and can't have and what to expect from you, and defining those expectations.
Yeah. Which is really hard to do, I think, for people in recovery, because one of the skills that I've seen consistently that people lack is how to relate to one another, and how to ask for your needs to be met. It's a really daunting thing to ask for, because many of us have lived in familial situations where, a parent has substance use disorder, and there's been some dysfunction in the family unit. So from a very young age, we've not developed that skill of being able to articulate our needs. So that's really hard. And I think that's a really useful skill that I found through the process of recovery, particularly therapy.
Yeah, no, awesome.
And Melody Beattie, of course.
No, excellent. And I just wondered if you had any advice for the audience or anything else on your mind as we come kind of towards the end.
Just really words of encouragement that, dream big, because I believe that people in recovery don't realise how capable they are, and I don't want to overlook the inequity that exists within society that makes it harder for some people to prosper in life, because that really is true. I believe that my privilege has enabled me to succeed as much as I have. It doesn't mean I haven't struggled, but I haven't struggled as much as people without that privilege. So I would say that to believe that, you are capable, and to also acknowledge within that capability your privilege. I think that's really important. People say that we shouldn't bring social justice and politics into recovery, but if we overlook the inequities in recovery, then we're just using our privilege to deny those experiences. So, we need to hear the voices of Black and brown people and queer people, and we need to provide resources for those people too. We need to not have just like this white-centric, hetero recovery, which doesn't make it appealing or safe for some people. So I think that's really important too.
Yeah, and having that diversity and, like you say, ability to support those people with, like you say, your blog, for example, anyone can read it. There's no prejudice on your blog. It's just kind of your words and information and awesomeness that you put out there.
Yeah, and it's also a white person's perspective. You know, I might be queer, but I'm still white. So, you know, I could definitely do more. And that's a big reason why I'm doing my social work masters, so that I can be more equitable and inclusive. That's really important to me.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. And yeah, thanks very much for coming on. Did you have any final thoughts or words or anything you'd like to say to the audience, or anywhere you'd like to send them or anything like that?
If they want to know more about my writing, you can find me on Liv's Recovery Kitchen, or just search my name, Liv Pennelle, and a lot of my blogs will come up. I did have a podcast which is still out there called Breaking Free Your Recovery Your Way, and it talks a lot about these topics, although that's no longer active. But the recordings are still out there. And just thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And to our audience, thanks for listening. I'll link to all of your stuff below and make sure everyone can find it all. And yeah, it's just been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, especially on a Friday night. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent.
All right. Thanks so much.